The Criminal District Court of Landry County is now in session. The Honorable Lana Myers presiding.
Please be seated. Good evening and welcome to the final round of the state high school mock trial competition. I'll now call the case of the state of Texoma versus Avery Jackson. And before we get started, please make sure that your cell phone is either in the off position or on silent. We don't want any disruptions during the trial. And so with that, all right. If you would please introduce yourselves. Representing the state of Texas, please introduce yourselves.
Good evening, Your Honor.
Or state of Texoma, excuse me.
Good evening, Your Honor. My name is Carolyn Caldwell, and I will be representing the prosecution along with co-counsel Darby Daniel and Nina Erdner. May our witnesses introduce themselves?
Yes.
Good evening, Your Honor. My name is Gabriella Newkirk, and I will be portraying the role of Dana Scully.
Good evening, Your Honor. My name is Enoch Erdner, and I will be portraying the role of Arizona Robbins.
Good evening, Your Honor. My name is Caden Cameron, and I will be portraying the role of Lane Parrish.
Thank you. And if the defense would please introduce yourselves and your witnesses.
Good evening, Your Honor. Members of the jury, my name is Grace Rochester, and today I will be conducting the direct examination of Addison Montgomery, the cross-examination of Dana Scully, as well as delivering the closing argument.
Good evening, Your Honor. Members of the jury, my name is Jana Nama, and today I will be conducting the direct examination of Avery Jackson and the cross-examination of Arizona Robbins.
Good evening, Your Honor. Members of the jury, my name is Charlie Stock, and today I will be conducting the direct examination of Nurse Alex Karev, the cross-examination of Lane Parrish, as well as delivering today's opening statement.
And our witnesses, Your Honor?
Yes.
Good evening, Your Honor, members of the jury. My name is Mike Rutherford, and today I'll be portraying Avery Jackson.
Good evening, Your Honor, members of the jury. My name is Kathleen McNeil, and today I will be portraying Alex Karev.
Good evening, Your Honor, members of the jury. My name is Ryan Guerin, and today I will be portraying Dr. Addison Montgomery.
Thank you. And if you'll remain standing, have all the witnesses stand, please, and I'll swear all of you in at once. Please raise your right hand. Do you and each of you promise that the testimony you are about to give will faithfully and truthfully conform to the facts and rules of the Texas High School Mock Trial Competition?
I do.
All right, thank you. Please be seated. Is the state ready to present your opening statement?
Yes, but first, Your Honor, the prosecution has some housekeeping matters to attend to. May we do so?
Yes.
First, may we move about the well for opening and closing statements?
You may.
And may we move about the well for cross and direct examination?
You may.
And what is your preference on approaching witnesses?
Ask to approach the witness
Thank you, Your Honor.
before doing so.
And with that, we're ready to proceed.
All right, thank you. All right.
Your Honor, the defense also has some pretrial matters to attend to.
Go ahead.
We ask for the same courtesies as prosecution has been given.
Yes.
And Your Honor, defense has prepared a binder full of stipulation, case, the statements, and the rules of competition, if Your Honor would so like.
Sure. Thank you.
Your Honor, the defense has also created a binder full of all the exhibits, if you would like that now, or we can give you a courtesy copy as they are entered individually.
You can just give me a courtesy copy when they're introduced.
Yes, Your Honor. And with that, the defense is present and ready to proceed.
All right, thank you. All right, you may proceed with your opening statement.
I'm trying to get this microphone on and then I'll be ready to proceed. May it please the court, opposing counsel, members of the jury. God knows what would happen to the patients here. This was a statement made by the defendant, Avery Jackson. Now we're all used to hearing about doctors playing God, taking patients' lives into their own hands. But on April 1st, 2017, Avery Jackson tried to play God. That night, he hacked into Texoma General Hospital's online medical records system. He shut down the system the hospital relied on, demanding he receive $150,000. And if they didn't pay, he threatened to delete the records permanently. You'll hear that Avery Jackson did this knowing it would put patients in danger. And he was right. The day of the hack, Mulder Scully, a 75-year-old man, simply got a cut on his left hand. His daughter, Dana Scully, took him to the hospital where she thought he'd be well cared for. A simple cut. They went to the hospital thinking this would be a simple fix, that he'd be right back to working in the garden where he got his injury in the first place. What should have been a simple fix turned into a nightmare for Mulder Scully and his entire family. His nurse, Alex Karev, began the patient's treatment when he input his medical history. The next day, Avery Jackson had hacked the system and all medical records were locked. Mulder Scully's hand was causing him pain, so Dr. Arizona Robbins prescribed him a medication. But because the PMT system was down, they didn't know Mulder Scully's allergies, and a medication he was allergic to was administered. This caused an allergic reaction, but because the PMT system was down, even trained medical professionals couldn't recognize this reaction without the PMT. This allergic reaction led to anaphylactic shock, cardiac arrest, and finally, his death. Today, you'll hear that if the PMT system had been up, this would have been a simple fix. Nurse Alex Karev would have opened his me pad to find Mulder Scully's allergies. And even if the drug that the patient was allergic to still would have been administered, hospital staff could have input his allergic reaction symptoms into the PMT, recognized the reaction, and treated it. You'll hear today that if the PMT system had been up, Mulder Scully would still be alive. The hack of the PMT system began months ago, when Avery Jackson was still an employee at Texoma General Hospital. The hospital implemented the PMT system intending to help the patients. But instead, Avery Jackson exploited it. Avery Jackson, while he was an employee, fought to get rid of the no-pay ransom policy the hospital adopted. While he was still working at TGH, he made sure the hospital was willing to pay the ransom a hacker asked for. And when he was fired, he hacked the system and asked for that very ransom. Ask yourselves, what's a life worth? To Avery Jackson, a life was worth $150,000 and the chance to prove he was right. He turned a warning into a threat, and a threat into an action, hacking the hospital, shutting down its system, and leaving the patients helpless until he received his ransom. We, as the prosecution, carry the burden of proof in today's case. Proof beyond a reasonable doubt. We must prove to each and every one of you that Avery Jackson's hack is the proximate cause of Mulder Scully's death. We gladly accept this burden and believe that through witness testimony and evidence, you all will see that the hospital was in chaos due to Avery Jackson's actions. We're here to hold Avery Jackson accountable for the life he took and the future he took away. Mulder Scully will never be able to grow old with his wife. He'll never be able to see his grandkids walk across the stage at graduation. Avery Jackson took that future away from him, and he's not above the consequences. At the end of today's trial,
Find a verdict of justice for Mulder Scully's family. Find Avery Jackson guilty. Thank you.
Is the defense ready to proceed with your opening statement?
Yes, Your Honor. May it please the court, Your Honor, opposing counsel, members of the jury. My client is a hacker, but he's not a killer. He did not cause the death of Mulder Scully. Opposing counsel told you Mulder Scully's injury should have been a simple fix. They're right, it should have. But it wasn't because of the actions of the Texoma General Hospital. If it wasn't for the mistakes that the hospital made, Mulder Scully would still be alive today. And now, to shift the blame from their own mistakes, they have accused my client. Avery Jackson's a hacker, members of the jury. He hacked the hospital, but he's no killer. My name is Charlie Stock, and I, along with my co-counsel Grace Rochester and Jana Naha, represent the defendant Avery Jackson, whom you will hear from today. And he will tell you that he was an employee at the Texoma General Hospital, and he worked in their computer and technology group. It was there he learned of the PMT, the paperless medical technology, a massive and expensive digital system that allowed doctors and nurses in the hospital to view and access patient records. Now, you will hear today that prior to the system's implementation, Avery Jackson was able to discover some serious security flaws in the system. So to address his concerns, he went to his boss, Parrish. But instead of being praised, he was ignored. Not to be deterred and understanding the seriousness of the flaws he found inside the PMT system, he wrote to the chairman of the board of directors. But again, he was ignored, this time being fired. Avery Jackson knew he had to fix the system, but no one would listen to him. He knew what he had discovered was too important to be ignored, so to force the hospital to confront the dangers of their system, he decided to expose the very vulnerabilities of which he had repeatedly warned the hospital. He hacked into the system and locked access to patient records. However, at that time, my client was very well aware of Section 4.2 of the hospital's policies and procedures. Because of that, he knew in cases of emergency involving patient records, the hospital board was authorized to protect patient safety. They were supposed to put patients' lives over money, but they didn't. And as a result, one of their patients, Mulder Scully, is dead. Now, the prosecution has the burden of proof in today's case. It's their job to prove to you all of the elements of today's case beyond a reasonable doubt. Now, beyond a reasonable doubt is the highest burden in our legal system. It's a higher burden than what's needed to take your children from you, members of the jury. The law says you have to be more certain than that to convict my client. And they have to prove to you beyond a reasonable doubt two elements in particular. The first, that Avery Jackson consciously disregarded a substantial and unjustifiable risk to patient safety. And the second, that Mulder Scully's death would not have occurred but for Avery Jackson's actions. And they will not be able to meet that burden. The evidence will simply not allow it. Because you will hear that the dismissal of my client's warning to fix the system was just the beginning of the hospital's incompetence. And Alex Karev, Mulder Scully's nurse, whom we will call, will tell you about the hospital's incompetence. She will tell you that she and Mulder Scully's doctor, Dr. Arizona Robbins, were warned that Mulder Scully was allergic to a specific type of drug. But they gave him that drug anyway, and it killed him. You will hear that Mulder Scully's doctor would have prescribed that deadly medication even with access to the medical records. Now, you will also hear from renowned medical expert Addison Montgomery today, who will tell you that Dr. Robbins should have been able to save Mulder Scully, but failed. Not because of the PMT, but because she forgot how to do her job. She forgot how to be a doctor. The Texoma General Hospital was entrusted to treat and care for their patients, and members of the jury, they violated that trust. Their mistakes, their actions were sufficient to cause the death regardless of my client's actions. And because my client's actions were insufficient to cause the death, you will not be able to find him criminally responsible. So at the end of trial today, my co-counsel Grace Rochester will come before you and ask you to return a verdict of not guilty. Don't allow the prosecution to distract you from the mistakes the hospital made. Don't allow them to shift the hospital's blame onto Avery Jackson. He's a hacker, members of the jury, but he's not a killer. Thank you.
Call your first witness.
The prosecution calls Dana Scully to the stand. Good evening. Can you turn to the jury and introduce yourself?
I'm Dana Scully, and I don't have any allergies, just so everyone knows.
Can you tell the court a little bit about yourself?
Well, I live in Texoma City with my spouse and 2 children. At the age of 16, I quit my one and only job to pursue veganism full-time.
Let's talk about the reason that you're here today. Can you tell the jury a little bit about your father?
Yeah, my dad and I were really close, and he was always fairly healthy, but when I introduced him to veganism, he took a turn for the better. You know, veganism gets a really bad rep, but in my dad's case, it really was beneficial.
Can you tell us a little bit more about him?
Yeah, he and my mom were big on gardening. They loved their flowers. That's actually what sent him to the hospital in the first place.
How did you first find out about your father's injury?
On April 1st, I went over to my parents' house to check up on them and check up on my dad and make sure that there was no dairy in the house. When I got there, he had this big gash on his hand and blood. At the sight of blood, I can't handle blood well, so I took him to Texoma General Hospital.
What happened when you arrived at the hospital?
A nurse had my father admitted and came into the room to get him situated.
Can you tell us what happened after your father was admitted to Texoma General Hospital?
Yes, the nurse started asking my father a bunch of questions, including any allergies he had. So my father mentioned that he was allergic to penicillin.
Is penicillin your father's only allergy?
No, my father was a bit out of it. He had just been rushed to the hospital with this big gash, and so it slipped his mind that he was also allergic to naproxen. So I made sure to let him know.
How did the nurse record your father's information?
The nurse put everything into a me pad and then put a bright red wristband around my dad's wrist.
Would you recognize a photo of this wristband if I were to show it to you?
Yes, I would.
Your Honor, permission to approach the witness with Exhibit 1?
You may.
Opposing counsel. Your Honor, would you like a copy?
I have one. Thank you.
Miss Scully, what have I just handed to you?
This is a photo of the bright red wristband they put on my dad's wrist at Texoma General Hospital.
Is this a fair and accurate representation?
Yes, it is.
Have any apparent changes been made?
No.
Your Honor, at this time we offer Exhibit 1 into evidence.
Any objection?
No objections, Your Honor.
All right, the exhibit is admitted.
Miss Scully, can you show this photo to the jury and read it aloud for the court?
Sure.
Your Honor, may I reposition myself to better see the exhibit?
You may.
It says allergy in big, bold letters.
Anywhere on this wristband are your father's allergies mentioned?
No.
To your knowledge, was there anywhere besides the me pad that the nurse recorded your father's allergies?
No, not to my knowledge.
Thank you, Mrs. Scully. Miss Scully, what happened when Nurse Krev finished recording your father's information?
Well, she left the room and Dr. Arizona Robbins came in to further examine my dad's hand.
How did the doctor proceed?
The doctor first ordered some hydrocodone, a painkiller, and then a CT scan. After that, the doctor recommended that my father stay overnight for observation.
After the doctor recommended that he stay overnight, did you stay with your father?
I stayed with him for a little while, but I had to get home. I have a family to get to, and I had to update my blog on veganism, The Healthy Chickpea.
What time did you return the next morning?
On April 2nd, I returned around 9 a.m.
Now, on the morning of April 2nd, how did your father appear to you?
He wasn't doing good. He had a lavender aura.
That morning, did any of the nurses or doctors check on your father?
Not while I was there. Actually, all the doctors and nurses that I saw seemed to be running around all frazzled.
How long did you stay with your father that morning?
I stayed with him for a while, but I had to leave. I had a protest for endangered tadpoles. For some reason, they keep turning into frogs.
What time did you return to the hospital later that day?
I returned with my 2 children around 5:45. I remember because my daughter was tugging at my sleeve, asking what time we'd get to go see Grandpa.
Upon arriving at the hospital that evening, What did you see?
The body language of everyone that I saw at the hospital was off. The energy of the hospital was suffocating.
Miss Scully, do you need to take a moment?
No, I'm okay. I told my life coach I would stay strong.
Okay, please continue.
We got inside and upstairs to my father's room, and I was astonished to find out that my dad had been killed. My dad? From a cut on his hand? I was furious and confused. I should have had more time with him. We should have had more time with him. And that was stolen from me.
Miss Scully, I know this must be difficult for you to talk about, but can you explain what happened to your father?
He was administered bocatraxephin, which is a derivative of naproxen, one of my father's allergies.
Did you learn anything else about your father's death?
I learned that Avery Jackson hacked the hospital while my father was there.
How did you respond to your father's death in the months following?
I was heartbroken. I still am. It was so hard on my family. My mother, shortly after, died of a broken heart, I'm sure.
Your Honor, we've passed the witness.
Cross-examination.
Yes, Your Honor. Ms. Scully, I'm very sorry for your loss, but I do have to ask you a couple questions, if that's all right.
Okay.
Now, you took your father to Texoma General Hospital on April 1st, correct?
That's correct.
And as you stated, Nurse Krev took you back for the intake process, right?
Yes.
And this is where his allergies were made known to the medical staff, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
And your father mentioned penicillin,
Yes.
but he never mentioned naproxen, right?
No, it slipped his mind. He didn't.
Right, so you had to remind them, didn't you?
I did.
And you also had to remind them that this allergy had almost killed him once before, isn't that right?
If I recall, he's the one who mentioned that, but yes.
So that's a yes, it did almost kill him once before?
That's a yes.
And they gave your father a red allergy wristband, isn't that correct?
They did.
Your Honor, may I retrieve Exhibit 1 from the
You
witness?
may.
As you stated on direct examination, this is that wristband, right?
Yes, it is.
And nowhere on the wristband does it say penicillin?
No, it doesn't.
And nowhere on this wristband does it say naproxen?
No.
It just says allergy, isn't that correct?
That's right.
And Ms. Scully, because of the severity of this allergy, you decided to write your number on the whiteboard, isn't that correct?
I did.
And you told them to call if they had any questions or concerns?
Yes.
Your Honor, may I approach the witness with what has been previously marked as Exhibit 2?
You may.
Let the record reflect I'm tendering to opposing counsel. This is the whiteboard in your father's room, correct?
Yes, it is.
And it doesn't look changed or altered in any way?
No, it doesn't.
And it's a clear and accurate representation of that whiteboard, isn't it?
Yes, it is.
Your Honor, at this time, defense moves to enter Exhibit 2 into evidence.
Any objection?
No objections, Your Honor.
The exhibit is admitted.
Now, Ms. Scully, this is your phone number in the bottom corner, correct?
Yes, it is.
And it's written in red pen?
It is.
And the rest of the board is written in blue, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
And as you previously stated, you told the hospital staff to call you if they had any questions or concerns, right?
I did.
But Ms. Scully, you never received a phone call, did you?
No, I didn't.
And on April 2nd, when you got there on 5:45, that was when you were informed that your father had passed away, isn't that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
But Dr. Robbins shifted the blame and said that it was the medication that Nurse Karev administered, isn't that correct?
Yes, that's what he said.
And so, you screamed at Nurse Karev, didn't you?
I did. In a heated moment, I didn't know what was up or what was down, so I did. I did
Right.
yell.
You were mad at her for what she did or didn't do, isn't that right?
I was.
And Miss Scully, you blame the hospital for your father's death, don't you?
Initially, I did blame the hospital, but now, after gathering more information,
Right, initially, you sued the hospital actually, didn't you?
yes, I did.
And you blamed Dr. Robbins and Nurse Karev, isn't that right?
That's right.
You were mad at Dr. Robbins and Nurse Karev for what they did or didn't do, isn't that right?
Yes, before I had all the information, I thought it was their fault.
But Miss Scully, you settled with them prior to today's trial, isn't that correct?
That's correct.
And so Miss Scully, now you're shifting the blame to Avery Jackson, isn't that correct?
Yes, because with more information, I understand that it's Avery Jackson who killed my father.
But, Miss Scully, the mistakes that were made by Dr. Robbins' Nurse Krev aren't erased, are they?
The mistakes that were made wouldn't have been made if the PMT system had been up.
Redirecting you back to my question, those mistakes aren't erased, are they?
No, of course not.
No further questions, Your Honor. I pass the witness.
Redirect examination.
Yes, Your Honor. Now, Miss Scully, why did you file a lawsuit against the hospital?
I filed a lawsuit against the hospital because initially it did seem like their fault. Naturally, anyone would think that. And during this investigation, this internal investigation and this lawsuit, I received more information and understood that it was Avery Jackson's fault that my father died.
Now, to your knowledge, did the nurse record your father's information anywhere except the PMT?
Not to my knowledge, no.
Your Honor, we've passed the witness.
Recross examination.
No recross necessary, Your Honor.
You may step down.
Your Honor, at this time we call Dr. Arizona Robbins to the stand. Good afternoon, Dr. Robbins. Can you introduce yourself to the jury?
Howdy, I'm Arizona Robbins, and I'm currently employed at Texoma General Hospital. I knew that I wanted to go into the medical field after I witnessed my brother get trampled by a cow. Actually, it was a herd of cows, but either way.
Dr. Robbins, what's your educational background?
Well, I graduated from Texoma University with a Bachelor in Science and Biology. I then went on to Harvard Medical School and started my residency here in Texoma General Hospital.
How long have you worked at Texoma General Hospital?
I've worked at Texoma General Hospital for around 10 years now, and really throughout all these years there have been so many changes.
What changes are you referring to?
Well, the change that stands out the biggest is the PMT system.
And what was on this PMT system?
Well, this is where we stored all the patient information instead of having it on paper.
And with the PMT in place, did you have to write down any information?
Absolutely not. The PMT had all of the information.
With the PMT in place, were you obligated to memorize patient information?
Absolutely not. This is what the PMT was for, and it was very important.
Was there ever a time when this PMT system was not working?
Yes, ma'am, when the defendant, Avery Jackson, hacked into the system and shut it down. Unfortunately, while it was shut down, patient Mulder Scully sadly passed away. Bless his heart.
Dr. Robbins, was Mulder Scully a patient of yours?
Yes, ma'am.
And at what point did you see him during his treatment?
Well, after Nurse Karev went through the intake process, I entered the room and prescribed 10 milligrams of hydrocodone and a CT scan.
Dr. Robbins, would you recognize a picture of his medical chart if I were to show it to you?
I would.
Your Honor, permission to approach the witness with what has been previously marked as Exhibit 3.
You may.
Opposing counsel. Take a moment to look it over if you need, but once you're finished, will you explain to the jury what this exhibit is?
Yes, this is Mulder Scully's medical chart.
Is this a fair and accurate representation?
I would believe so, yes.
Have any apparent changes been made?
Not that I can see, no.
Your Honor, at this time, we offer Exhibit 3 into evidence.
Any objection?
No objections, Your Honor.
All right, the exhibit is admitted.
Dr. Robbins, can you hold up this exhibit and show it to the jury? Briefly explain what was on Mulder Scully's medical chart.
Yes, ma'am. So, as you'll see, there's contact information at the top of the chart with family members. There was the treatment log and counter notes, medications, and there was a very important spot where you could input patient symptoms and get a suggested diagnosis. This was very important.
Thank you, Dr. Robbins. You can set that exhibit down. So before you entered this exhibit, you mentioned that you ordered a CT scan. What were the results of this CT scan?
Well, it showed no structural damage, but I did keep the patient overnight just for further observation.
And the next day, did you find his condition the same?
It was mostly the same, but I did prescribe medication because he was in pain and there was still swelling.
And what medications did you prescribe?
Well, I prescribed Bocotraxone and penicillin, but before this was administered, the nurse, Alex Karev, actually pointed out an allergy wristband.
And with the PMT down, how did you get Mulder Scully's allergies?
Well, we couldn't look in the PMT system for his allergies, so we asked the patient and verbally confirmed his allergies, therefore administering a medication he was not allergic to.
And what medications did you end up prescribing after knowing his allergies?
Yes, ma'am, this was Bocotractopin and Yorbathromax.
Did the patient's condition improve with the 2 medications?
Well, not really. About 45 minutes later, Alex Karev called me back into the room, and the patient appeared to be having a bad reaction to what I'd ordered.
Dr. Robbins, can you clarify what you mean by bad reaction?
Well, he had a rash near his face and was having trouble breathing and hypotension.
Well, what do you think was occurring?
Well, I had no idea, and this couldn't be an allergic reaction because we had asked the patient what his allergies were, and I administered accordingly.
So if you didn't know what was occurring, what did you and Nurse Karev do?
Well, at this time, the patient was going into anaphylactic shock, and I had to call a code blue and run out of the room very fast to consult another doctor to help my patient.
Well, what happened when you were out of the room?
Well, sadly, the patient unfortunately died. Bless his heart.
Now, Dr. Robbins, if the PMT system had been up when you were ordering medications, would you have seen Mulder Scully's allergies?
Absolutely. The PMT system had all the information that I needed, and that is what the defendant took away from us.
If the PMT system had been up, could you have treated his allergic reaction?
Yes, I could have.
And Dr. Robbins, has this PMT system ever gone down before?
No, ma'am. This had never happened, and nurses and doctors are not ready for this. And this is what the defendant did to us.
Your Honor, at this time we pass the witness.
Cross-examination.
Yes, Your Honor. May I retrieve Exhibit 2 from the witness stand before I proceed?
Yes, you may.
Dr. Robbins, I'd like to ask you a few questions if that's okay with you.
Absolutely.
Now, you've been employed at the TGH for some time now, correct?
I have, about 10 years.
You were employed at the TGH before the paperless system was implemented, correct?
Yes, 9.5 years before.
Now, you didn't receive a pamphlet about how to operate that paperless system, did you?
No.
You didn't receive any training at all on how to operate that paperless system, did you?
No, it was quite simple and very effective, as long as it was working.
So that is a no.
Yes. Or no. It's a no.
I understand what you're saying. And you also believe that this tragedy could have been avoided if the hospital didn't change to that paperless system, don't you?
If the hospital, well, if we still have the papers, yes, but the PMT is what we were using, and that was taken away from us.
So, redirecting you back to my question, you do believe that this tragedy could have been avoided if the TGH did not transition to that paperless system. That's correct?
You could say that could have happened, yes.
Now, Dr. Robbins, as a doctor, it is your job to be familiar with your patient's plan of care. That's correct?
Yes, ma'am.
Your Honor, may I approach the witness with what has been previously entered as Exhibit 2?
You may.
Now, before I approach you, you mentioned on direct examination that you did have to ask Mr. Scully to verify his allergies, correct?
At what part in the treatment are you referring to?
Whenever the records were not available, correct?
Yes, we did.
This is Mr. Scully's plan of care that was on the whiteboard in his room, correct?
Yes, that's correct, yes.
And right next to it in red is Dana Scully's phone number. Is that right?
That's true.
Dana Scully is actually Mr. Scully's daughter, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
Now, you could have called Miss Scully and asked her about your patient's allergies. Is that right?
Yes, ma'am.
But instead, you asked a 75-year-old man on pain medication to recall what he was allergic to. Am I correct in saying that?
Yes, we did ask the patient.
And after asking him, you then prescribed Bocotracopin and Yorbathromax. That's
medication that he said he was not allergic to.
Right. You actually know quite a bit about that Boco medication, don't you?
I do.
You got sent on an all-expense-paid trip to Hawaii to learn about that Boco medication, right?
Yes, ma'am. It was a very nice trip.
And on that trip, you learned about the medical trials, right?
Yes.
And the reactions that were found in patients.
Yes.
Because you learned about that, you know of one specific reaction called NERD, correct?
I do.
And when patients are exhibiting NERD, which is, just to clarify, NERD is specific to that Boco medication, correct?
Yes.
And when patients are exhibiting NERD, they normally show hypotension, correct?
Yes.
A skin rash?
Yes, common symptoms.
And trouble breathing, like asthma-like symptoms, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
Now, 45 minutes after you had given Mr. Scully that BOCO medication, he was actually having hypotension, wasn't he?
Yes, ma'am, he was.
He was having a skin rash
Yes, ma'am.
and trouble breathing, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
But you didn't recognize this reaction to be NERD, did you?
Not at the time because we had clarified with the patient what his allergies were.
So that is a no, you did not recognize that reaction to be NERD?
No, ma'am.
And you didn't think that reaction was any type of allergic reaction at all at this point, did you?
No, as I said, because we asked the patient what his allergies were and I administered accordingly.
Right. Now, you also learned on that trip in Hawaii that when someone is having NERD, they don't respond to epinephrine or an EpiPen. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Now, after Mr. Scully was exhibiting those same 3 symptoms, you and the TGH medical staff administered an EpiPen. Is that correct?
Yes.
To which Mr. Scully did not respond.
Very unfortunately, no. Bless his heart.
And even at this point, you still didn't think he was having NERD, did you?
No, because again, we had asked the patient what his allergies were.
And you didn't think he was having any sort of allergic reaction. At this point, no?
No, ma'am.
Now, when you got those records back, specifically Exhibit 3, you saw that you had given your patient a derivative of a medication that he was allergic to. Is that correct?
I did.
And your patient was still alive at this time, wasn't he?
He was.
And at this point, you still didn't think he was having NERD or any type of allergic reaction.
No, ma'am.
Now, you left the room when your patient was going into cardiac arrest. Am I correct in saying that?
That's correct. I actually ran out of the room to consult a doctor. I had to do this very quickly.
Right, and when you were out of the room, your patient died, correct?
Unfortunately, yes.
And now you're here today blaming the death of your patient on Avery Jackson. Am I correct in saying that?
Yes, and I'm putting the blame on the correct place.
Despite you being the one that prescribed that BOCO medication?
Yes, ma'am, I did prescribe the medication.
That BOCO medication is a derivative of a medication that your patient was allergic to, correct?
Yes.
And just to clarify for the jury, at the point that you had given that medication, you knew that you couldn't see his allergies. Is that correct?
Yes, ma'am.
And giving that BOCO medication, prescribing a new medication, despite not being able to have access to those allergies, it wasn't an emergency situation, was it?
Not at the time, no.
His life wasn't in dire need of a new medication, was it?
Not at the time, but he was having some pain and swelling.
But you still decided to prescribe a new medication despite not having access to his allergies, is that correct?
Well, we did ask the patient, as I've said, but yes, because the PMT system was down and the defendant hacked it, we did not have access to our most important resource.
And bocotraxephin, a medication you still may have prescribed even with access to that PMT. I'm correct in saying that?
Yes, ma'am, I want to consider this.
No further questions, Your Honor. I pass the witness.
Redirect, Your Honor.
Yes.
Oh, goodness. During Mulder Scully's treatment, why did you not think an allergic reaction was occurring?
Well, I attended a conference, as we talked about, and I was informed that patients that are allergic to bocotraxephin or naproxen have very low risk of serious allergic reactions, and the benefits of bocotraxephin heavily outweigh the risks.
If the PMT system had been up, would you have seen his allergies when ordering medications?
Oh, yes, ma'am, absolutely.
And if the PMT system had been up, could you have treated his allergic reaction?
Yes, ma'am.
No further questions, Your Honor.
Any cross-examination?
Briefly, Your Honor. Dr. Robbins, with a yes or no, even when that system was up, you still weren't able to save your patient. Is that correct?
Yes, ma'am.
No further questions, Your Honor. I pass the witness.
May my witness step down?
Yes, you may step down.
And Your Honor, the prosecution calls Lane Parrish to the stand. Hi, Mr. Parrish. It's nice to see you again. Could you turn to the jury and tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. I'm not much for introductions, but my name is Lane Parrish. I'm 42, and I'm currently employed as the Chief Information Officer at Texoma General Hospital. You might have heard me referred to a few times as McDreamy.
What technology have you worked with?
Actually, I have an expression for this. Une seule langue n'est jamais suffisant. That's French for one language is never enough. That's why I also speak Java, C, HTML. I think you get the picture.
Mr. Parrish, can you tell us about your education?
Sure. Well, I graduated with a Bachelor's of Science in Computer Engineering and then continued to get a Master's degree in Cybersecurity. At the same time, I started a mock trial club, and I was hoping there'd be best witness for a real court like this, but that was not the case.
Mr. Parrish, you said that you were Chief Information Officer of Texoma General Hospital. Can you tell us about your responsibilities with this position?
Sure, as the Chief Information Officer, my job, besides the medical equipment, is to be responsible for basically everything that plugs into a wall.
Were you involved with the PMT system?
Yes, that was my biggest project at Texoma General Hospital. We got the system from T-Rex Solutions and adapted it to fit the needs of our hospital.
What exactly did the PMT system do?
Well, it would do a large amount of things. First of all, it would suggest medications and treatments for patients. It would improve nurse-doctor communications considerably. It would basically change the whole dynamics of the hospital.
Now, you said you got the system from T-Rex Solutions. Were there any issues with the system previously?
Unfortunately, there was a hacking of another hospital who used the system, the Merchant Hospital. Even after paying the ransom of $1 million, unfortunately lost all of their records.
After learning about the hacking of the PMT system at Merchant Hospital, did you change your system at all?
Yes, I implemented the no pay ransom policy. This would deter hackers from even beginning to try to gain access to our system, as they wouldn't gain anything from doing so.
Would you recognize this no pay ransom policy if I were to show it to you?
Absolutely.
And our permission to approach with Exhibit 5.
You may.
Opposing counsel? Now, Mr. Parrish, take a moment to look this over if you need it. And when you're ready, can you tell me what I've just handed to you?
Sure. Yeah, this is the no pay ransom policy.
Is this a fair and accurate representation of that policy?
It appears to be so.
Have there been any apparent changes made?
No, ma'am.
Your Honor, we offer this exhibit into evidence.
Any objection?
No objections, Your Honor.
The exhibit is admitted.
Now, Mr. Parrish, can you summarize this ransomware policy for us?
Sure, without using all the legal mumbo jumbo, it basically says we will not pay ransom if the hospital is hacked. However, we do reserve the right to supersede the policy if we believe the patients are in danger.
Now, Mr. Parrish, did anybody advocate against the PMT system?
Yes. Avery Jackson, one of the newer employees that I hired, did not like the system, and he sent an email to the board of directors expressing his complaints, breaking our very strict chain of command rule. It was unfortunate that we had to let him go, as he was a very talented employee.
Mr. Parrish, would you recognize this email chain if I were to show it to you?
Yes.
And our permission to approach with Exhibit 7.
You may.
Once again, take a moment if you need. And what have I just handed you?
This is the email thread, which started with Avery Jackson sending an email to the board.
Is this a fair and accurate representation of that email thread?
Yes, it appears to be so.
Have there been any apparent changes made?
No, ma'am.
Your Honor, we offer Exhibit 7 into evidence.
Any objection?
No objections, Your Honor.
The exhibit is admitted.
Can you tell us about the email that Avery Jackson sent?
Sure, there's a few lines that really stick out to me. First is, where is it? Here it is. I have analyzed the software package provided by our outside vendor, and it has drastic security flaws that will put the hospital at serious risk of being hacked. And then later on, it says this other really interesting thing. There it is. Could crack into our system, and then God knows what would happen to the patients here.
Was there anything else that Avery Jackson, the defendant, warned about?
Well, he told us that the PMT system was vulnerable to attacks, and more specifically, that an attack on the system could, one, lead to issues with patient treatment, and two, put the patients in explicit danger.
Now, Mr. Parrish, I want to clarify. Did Avery Jackson warn about what kind of hack could lead to these problems?
No, ma'am. He just said that an attack on the system would put the patients in danger.
Okay, Mr. Parrish, let's talk about the day of the hack, April 1st. How did the hack start?
Well, I was going through my email, and I found an email from Avery Jackson posing as the Homeowners Association. The email contained information about a snake sighting in my neighborhood, and attached to that email was a picture of a snake. And I learned later that if you click on the picture of the snake, it would install malicious software.
When you first received this email, did it seem suspicious to you?
No, I receive Homeowners Association emails quite frequently.
And did you open this email?
Of course I did. I actually have snakes of my own. I was scared my coral snake, Little Jordan Humphrey, escaped from the back gate again.
Now, Mr. Parrish, what happened after you opened this email?
Well, a countdown appeared on the screen and a message that said that our records had been locked and it demanded a $150,000 ransom. I jumped on my computer to find, sure enough, that the system was inaccessible.
So you said the PMT system was hacked, then it was made inaccessible. What exactly does this mean?
Well, it means the entirety of the PMT system was locked and encrypted, and we could no longer see it. The intake process was slowed down considerably, and it decreased nurse-doctor communication as the nurses would input information on there and the doctors would read it and then prescribe treatments. However, this was inaccessible.
I'd just like to clarify, were the medical records available on the PMT system?
Yes, they were.
Was this the only place that they were available?
Yes, they were.
Okay, so after you realized that the PMT system was shut down, what did you do?
Well, I emailed the board of directors to let them know the situation, and then I got my team working on analyzing and attempting to disable the program and gain access to our files again.
After your team had worked to regain these files, were you able to?
Unfortunately not. The encryption level was far beyond anything I had seen, and my team was unable to dissolve the hack.
So after you realized that there was no way for your team to regain these files, what did you do?
Well, we worked a little longer until the board called us and let us know that we should go ahead and just pay the ransom.
And was this ransom paid?
Yes, $150,000 was wired into the account, and a message appeared on my screen that said, "Thanks for the cash, Dr. High and Mighty, not so high and mighty now." Kind of hurtful if I'm honest.
Dr. High and Mighty, was this phrase familiar to you?
Yes, this phrase was used explicitly by Avery Jackson to disparage me, unfortunately, and it was actually used on the email that he did send to the board of directors.
Okay, so let's take a step back. You said the PMT system was hacked.
Yes, it was.
Well, how long was the system shut down for?
18 hours.
Mr. Parrish, are you familiar with all aspects of the PMT system?
Yes, I am.
Are you familiar with its uses?
Yes, I am.
Are you familiar with its implementation into patient care?
Yes, I am.
So with your knowledge, can you tell us what were the consequences of the PMT system being down for 18 hours?
Unfortunately, like I said, the nurse-doctor communication was drastically reduced. The suggested treatments and diagnoses were no longer available. It completely changed how the hospital was operated.
During those 18 hours, was this the only place for those resources on the PMT system?
This was the only copies of allergies, patient information, medical records, everything.
Can you tell us, if you know, who is responsible for this hacking?
Yes, it was Avery Jackson, who's sitting right back there, and it's especially chilling to find out as he was the one who warned us of just how dangerous a hacking could be. They say doctors are the ones that play God, but it was Avery Jackson.
Objection, Your Honor. Speculation. This witness does not know whether Avery Jackson was intending to play God when he sent this ransom. The witness is speculating as to Avery Jackson's mindset at the time.
Any response?
Yes, Your Honor. This witness is not speculating about the witness or the defendant's mindset. He's simply saying that his actions were of that to play God, taking patients' lives into his hand, taking these records into his own hands.
Overruled.
Let's go back to this question. Who was responsible for the hacking that shut the PMT system down?
It was Avery Jackson who locked all of these medical information records, allergies, and medication treatments. Yes.
Thank you, Your Honor. With that, we pass this witness.
Cross-examination.
Yes, Your Honor. Now, Mr. Parrish, you had a meeting on February 21st, correct?
Yes, sir.
And Avery Jackson was at that meeting, right?
Yes, he was.
And in that meeting, Avery Jackson was very vocal about the vulnerability of your system, right?
Yes, and about the patient danger, yes.
But you made sure to reassure him your system was perfect, right?
Yes, and we did contact TRX Solutions, and they assured us that the system was fine.
I mean, you reassured him that patient safety would never be put at risk, correct?
At the time, yes, that is what I believed.
Yeah, that's what you told him, right?
Exactly, yes.
Now, I would like to talk about patient safety. You'd say you care about your hospital's patients, right?
Absolutely, although they're not my patients, I'm just the IT guy, as everyone else says.
And the hospital administrators, they care about patient safety?
Yes, they do. Are you referring to the board of directors?
Yeah.
Yes, I believe they do.
You'd certainly agree with me that patient safety should be far more important than money, shouldn't it?
Oh, well, it is, so yes.
But for you and your hospital board, patient safety wasn't more important than money, was it?
Objection, Your Honor, to speculation. I would ask that opposing counsel would only ask this witness to testify to his beliefs and not that of the hospital as well.
Your Honor, I can rephrase my question.
All right, rephrase.
For you, Lane Parrish, who had contact with the hospital board, Patient safety wasn't more important than money, was it?
That is incorrect.
Well, I'd like to talk about that. You have a no-pay policy that you talked about on direct examination?
Yes, and it would prevent things like the Merchant Hospital hacking, where they paid the ransom and the records were still deleted.
If you could just focus on my question, you have that policy, right?
Yes, I do. I believe it's somewhere up here.
Your Honor, may I approach the witness?
You may.
And you were talking about an exception to this policy on direct examination, right?
Yes.
If you don't mind, I'm going to read that exception.
Sure.
The hospital board may supersede this general policy in cases of emergency involving a complete denial of access to all patient records. I read that correctly, right?
Yes, you did.
And you informed Avery Jackson of that exception in your February 21st meeting, right?
Yes, I did.
I mean, that's the reason why you told him patients wouldn't be at risk. Because of that language, you could just override the no-pay policy, right?
Well, not just that, but yes, this was a contributing factor as to why the patient records would be safe.
But when you got hacked, you didn't override the no-pay policy immediately, did you?
Unfortunately not, no.
Well, I'd like to talk about the timeline a little bit. You were hacked at 11 o'clock at night, right?
Yes.
And then around 8 hours later, you sent an email to the board of directors because you couldn't crack the code, right?
Yes, we were unable to dissolve the hack, yes.
Right, that's when you realized the malware was impenetrable, correct?
Yes, it was.
But at that point, Your Honor, may I approach the witness?
You may.
I'd like to refer to the email thread that you entered on direct examination.
Sure.
I'm going to read you your board of directors' response to your email, all right?
Okay.
Your board of directors said regarding the ransom, we absolutely are not going to pay that ransom amount. I don't care what the virus had done. I read that correctly, right?
Yes.
Now, Mr. Parrish, after you got that response, you still continued to work on unlocking the records, right?
Yes, we did.
But you and the board of directors didn't actually pay a ransom until 18 hours were up, like you said on direct examination.
Well, after hearing how the Merchant Hospital paid $1 million and still didn't get the
Objection, Your Honor,
records.
non-responsive.
I sustain the objection.
You and the hospital board, like you said on direct examination, waited 18 hours before you paid any ransom, correct?
Yes, that is correct.
And that is 10 hours after you emailed them telling them you couldn't crack the code, correct?
Yes, sir.
And just to be clear, Mulder Scully died at the very end of that 18-hour time frame, correct?
Unfortunately, yes.
Now, you'd say this was a crisis situation while the records were locked, right?
Yes, I believe the people downstairs refer to this as a code blue.
And you'd say your number one priority was to get those records back, right?
Sure, at the time, yes.
But instead of actually unlocking the records yourself or petitioning the board to do so, you were actually asleep in your office while those records were locked, weren't you?
That's incorrect. If you'd like me to elaborate, I can.
No, Mr. Parrish. Is it your testimony today that you did not take a nap while those records were locked?
I did not take a nap. I passed out from sheer exhaustion, and I can elaborate on this further if you'd like me to.
No, you were actually asleep during the time of the records were locked. Yes or no, Mr. Parrish?
Yes, I was, and if you'd like me to elaborate, I can.
No, thank you, Mr. Parrish. All I need is the fact that you were asleep.
That's all right.
I'd like to actually transition a little bit. You are being required to testify today, aren't you?
Yes, I am.
As a part of the settlement agreement between your hospital and the Scully family?
Yes.
And you're required to testify on the side of the prosecution against Avery Jackson, correct?
Yes, sir.
But, Mr. Parrish, you didn't talk about everyone you believe is at fault on direct examination, did you?
I believe Avery Jackson is at fault.
Mr. Parrish, you're aware of Alex Karev, correct? Mulder Scully's nurse?
Yes, I am.
And you know that Mulder Scully's nurse, you believe that Mulder Scully's nurse, Alex Karev, cut corners, correct?
Sure, at times.
And with a yes or a no, Mr. Parrish, you believe that had Alex Karev not cut those corners, Mulder Scully would still be alive today.
Objection, Your Honor. Speculation and improper opinion.
Your Honor, I'm not asking
Response.
excuse me, Your Honor. I'm not asking the witness to speculate. I'm asking what he believes. As for improper opinion, again, Your Honor, this is what the witness believes. It goes directly to causation, one of the counts in today's case.
Your Honor, may I respond?
You may.
Just because this is what the witness believes doesn't mean it's one not speculative and not improper opinion. This is the IT tech guy of Texoma General Hospital. He's not well versed in treatment or patient care specifically, and not enough to assign blame of whether Alex Karev's changing his treatment would have affected Mulder Scully's death.
If I may respond?
You may.
I'm not asking this witness to say a definitive answer as to what caused his death, just what he believes based on the information he does know.
I'm not asking you to speculate, Your Honor.
I'll sustain the objection.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Mr. Parrish, just to reiterate, you and the board spent 10 hours after you told them you couldn't crack the code before you paid any ransom, yes or no?
Yes, we believe that we could still attempt and try to save these patients while we could.
No further questions, Your Honor. I pass the witness.
Redirect, Your Honor.
Yes.
Now, opposing counsel discussed how the policy was only overridden because you only cared about money. Well, is that why you overrid this policy?
No, absolutely not. We realized after the 10 hours that we weren't able to gain access to the records entirely. Before, there was a chance that we could, and we would fight for every chance that we got.
So opposing counsel also talked about a crisis situation. So let's talk about that. Was the PMT system shut down?
Yes, it was.
And what was taken away when the system was shut down?
Everything, all of the, again, the patient records, the nurse-doctor communications, and it's everything.
And who was responsible for this hacking that shut everything down?
Avery Jackson.
Thank you, Your Honor. I pass this witness.
Cross-examination.
Yes, Your Honor, briefly. One moment, Your Honor. Mr. Parrish, you're familiar with an internal investigation, correct?
Yes, I am.
Your Honor, may I approach the witness with Exhibit 8?
Objection, Your Honor. This is outside the scope of my redirect.
If I may respond, Your Honor, opposing counsel talked about who this witness believes is at fault. This is the information I was talking about earlier in which this witness learned about who he actually believes is at fault, Your Honor. It is within the scope.
Any response?
I stand by my objection that this is not within the scope of my redirect. I did not bring up an investigation, and I never laid any foundation for this investigation even occurring.
If I may respond, this witness did talk about who he believes at fault. This exhibit will go to counter that, Your Honor. It is within the scope.
All right, overrule.
Let the record reflect I'm tendering exhibit to opposing counsel. Do you recognize this?
Yes.
And this is that internal investigation you're familiar with, right?
Yes.
It doesn't appear to be changed or altered in any way?
It doesn't look like it, no.
And it's a fair and accurate representation of that internal investigation, right?
Yes, sir.
Your Honor, at this time, the defense moves to enter Exhibit 8 into evidence, reminding opposing counsel of Stipulation 6, which states that this exhibit is a business record and has been on file with the court for the proper amount of time.
Your Honor, I'm quite aware of this stipulation, and I have no objections.
All right, the exhibit is admitted.
Now, Mr. Parrish, based on the information that you learned in that internal investigation, you believe that had Alex Karev not cut corners, Mulder Scully would still be alive today.
Objection, Your Honor. I'd like to re-raise my objection from earlier of improper opinion and speculation.
Your Honor, responding to that, the information that he based this opinion off of is now entered into evidence. He has ample proof to show that he is not speculating, Your Honor. And as to improper opinion under the same grounds, that is also.
I'll overrule the objection.
Yes, Your Honor.
So I'm going to ask you again, based on that information, you believe that had Alex Karev not cut corners, Mulder Scully would still be alive?
That's what I believed, yes.
No further questions, Your Honor. I pass the witness.
Your Honor, may my witness step down and may I publish 2 exhibits to the jury?
Yes, he may step down and you may publish the exhibits.
And Your Honor, with that, we rest.
Is the defense ready to call your first witness?
Yes, Your Honor. At this time, the defense calls Avery Jackson to the stand. Your Honor, may I retrieve Exhibit 5 before I proceed?
You may.
May I proceed?
You may.
Good evening. Please introduce yourself to the ladies and gentlemen of the jury.
Good evening. I'm Avery Jackson. I'm 24 years old, and I lived in Texoma for my whole life.
Why are you here today?
I've been charged with manslaughter. When I worked at Texoma General Hospital, or TGH, I had some grave concerns about the new paperless medical technology, or PMT.
Mr. Jackson, what does that paperless medical technology have to do with you?
Well, after completing my research, I found that this system was not nearly as secure as it should be. I raised some constant concerns to my coworkers, but no one seemed to be listening to me. So I hacked into the system and sent it a ransomware note to prove my point, but now I'm being blamed for a patient's death.
Well, let's start from the beginning. When were you hired to start working at the Texoma General Hospital?
Well, I graduated from SMU, Pony Up, in 2016 with a degree in computer science. I then got my job with the hospital's so-called Computer and Technology Group, or CTG.
Why do you refer to them as the so-called Computer and Technology Group?
Well, because we worked under the blind direction of my boss, Lane Parrish. See, we were a small group of computer information specialists within the hospital. However, after getting accustomed, I began to realize that there were some real slackers when it came to cybersecurity.
What do you mean by this?
Well, in January of 2017, Parrish proposed implementing the new paperless medical technology. I was given the assignment of finding the necessary software package to bring this about. Everything sounded pretty easy and doable at first.
At first?
Yes, however, after completing my research, I found that T-Rex Solutions, the software that Parrish wanted to implement, was not nearly as secure as it should be, and it was just not up to date.
Did you tell your ex-boss about these security flaws that you found?
Yes, I told him that this system was notorious for having major security flaws. And when we had the CTG meeting in February, I let everyone know, including Lane, that we'd already had 2 hospital attacks recently with this software. One at a hospital in France, the other at a merchant hospital in Cascadia.
And what happened at those hospitals?
Hackers at both of these hospitals threatened to make all patient records public unless they received $1 million.
To your knowledge, were any patients harmed at either of those hospitals?
No, not at all. Not a single patient was harmed at either of these attacks, and based on what happened at these hospitals, I didn't think there would be any risk in my hacking.
What do you mean by you didn't think there would be a risk in your hacking?
Well, Lane constantly reassured me that if there was ever a cybersecurity attack to even happen, the worst possible thing would be that patient records would be made public. I never imagined that anyone would die. Never this. Not this.
So when you brought to light those vulnerabilities you found, did any improvements come?
No, this is really important to me, so I pushed for more cybersecurity testing, or at least that the system be rolled out on a limited base with more firewalls. But Lane Parrish blew me off, saying I was being overly dramatic and unrealistic.
So, Mr. Jackson, did you just give up?
No, I was not going to give up that easily, so I emailed Dr. Virginia Fox, the hospital's chair on the board of directors. I let her know about all of my concerns and how Lane had been constantly blowing off my warnings. I wasn't just going to sit back and watch us implement a whack system.
To your knowledge, was there a deadline in implementing this new paperless medical technology?
Yes, Parrish promised the board of directors he would have the system in place by March. It was now the end of February, so time was running out.
Now, you mentioned you sent an email to Dr. Virginia Fox on the board of directors. Did any improvements come after you sent that email?
Unfortunately, it was quite the opposite. On March 2nd, Parrish called me into his office and yelled at me for, and I quote, being an insubordinate, opinionated, egocentric, non-team player. And then he just fired me. He made me pack up all my things and had the hospital security walk me out.
Okay, so Mr. Jackson, what does all of this have to do with the ransom that you sent?
I knew that what I found was way too important to be ignored. So I decided to take action into my own hands.
And how exactly did you take action into your own hands?
On April 1st, I hacked into Parrish's TGH email account and sent him a ransom note. I set it up so that when he opened the email, the only thing in the hospital that was affected was the encryption on the patient records. Just the patient records. Nothing else in the hospital was touched at all.
Besides Lane Parrish, did you notify anyone else about the ransom you had just sent?
Yes, I also notified the local media.
And why did you notify the local media?
Well, I thought it would make Lane Parrish and the board of directors act faster. The sooner they paid back the ransom, the sooner they would get their records back. Pretty simple.
Why did you think that the hospital would pay that ransom so quickly?
because of the hospital's policy where they do not negotiate with hackers.
Your Honor, may I approach the witness with what has been previously entered as Exhibit 5?
You may.
Mr. Jackson, what is this?
This is that no pay policy.
Well, what is at the end of that no pay policy?
Well, here it describes that if the hospital will not negotiate with a hacker in the event of a cyber attack. However, the hospital may supersede or override this policy if patient records are unavailable.
Now, Mr. Jackson, who wrote that policy and the ability to override that policy?
Lane did.
And did the hospital abide by that policy as you expected they would?
No, unlike I completely expected, the hospital did not pay the ransom back immediately. Instead of getting the records back up front, they waited a whole 19 hours to pay the ransom. I never thought that anyone would be affected.
Was there any information concerning the email you sent Lane that you didn't tell him?
Yes, regardless of whether or not the ransom had been paid, the system was set up so that the records would be returned regardless at 11:59 the next day, no matter what.
Mr. Jackson, if it wasn't about the money, then what were your intentions in sending that email?
Truly, I had grave concerns about this new system. I knew that what I found was way too important to be ignored, and it needed major improvements, but no one seemed to be listening to me. Proving Lane Parrish wrong and getting the money was all just an added bonus, just a cherry on top.
Did you ever imagine you'd be here?
No, I never imagined that someone would die in the care of the hospital staff. Sure, I am a hacker, but I am not a killer.
No further questions, Your Honor. I pass the witness.
Cross-examination.
Yes, Your Honor. And Mr. Jackson, as you stated on direct, you worked at Texoma General Hospital, correct?
Yes, in the CTG.
And as an employee, you analyzed the PMT system.
Yes, that was my job.
But about a year after you were hired, you were fired, correct?
Yes, I was eventually fired.
And after you were fired, you decided to hack the system.
Yes, I did hack the system.
The system that held confidential patient information, correct?
Yes.
And as you testified on direct, your goal of the hack was to show the hospital that their system was flawed, correct?
Yes, I wanted them to make sure that they needed to make improvements with this system.
But you also had some other incentives, correct?
Some small, proportionate reasons, not nearly as big as the one as to change the hospital policy, or change the hospital system.
A small $150,000 ransom, correct?
Small for the hospital. I mean, it's really just a small price for them to pay.
Mr. Jackson, let me reiterate my question. This was a $150,000 ransom, correct?
Yes, that is what I set the ransom at.
And you even had a plan for this money, didn't you?
Yes.
You were going to put this money into a computer gaming lab, correct?
That's probably what I would have used the money for.
So the hospital paid the ransom.
Eventually, after 19 hours, yes, they did.
And you pocketed $150,000, correct?
I did.
Now let's talk about what you did in preparation for your hack. You had to know which computer to hack, correct?
Yes.
And you knew that the best computer to hack was the one with the greatest security privileges.
Who was Lane Parrish?
Right, and you would agree with me that since you were an employee at TGH, you knew Lane Parrish was the one with the greatest security privileges.
Well, he was the chief information officer, so yes.
But you would agree with me that you knew this since you were an employee at TGH.
Yes.
Now let's talk about the policies that were in place when you worked at TGH.
Okay.
You voiced your concerns about these policies, didn't you?
Well, it was my job to find holes in the system and make sure we were implementing the right system. So when I found vulnerabilities, I made sure to bring them up in the meetings and to my boss, Lane Parrish.
Right, you warned the hospital about these flaws, correct?
Yes, I did.
You warned Lane Parrish and the board of directors that something could happen to the patients in a hack.
Yes, I was assuming that this patient information would be made public and something like embarrassment or fraud or identity theft could happen to these poor patients.
Mr. Jackson, let me redirect you to my question. Yes or no, you warned Lane Parrish that something could happen to the patients in a hack.
Yes,
And you heard Lane Parrish testify today, correct?
I did.
You heard him tell the court that you warned if the system was hacked, patients could be put in danger. Did you hear that?
Yes, the danger of
Well-
embarrassment, never the danger of harm or death.
But let me read you my question. Lane Parrish stated simply, you warned if the system was hacked, patients would be put in danger, correct?
Yes.
Now let's talk about this no pay ransom policy at the hospital. This no pay ransom policy, you didn't like it, did you?
I had concerns about it, just like everything else that Lane Parrish did.
You went to the hospital board and fought against it.
Yes,
And you made sure the hospital was willing to pay a hacker's ransom.
I wanted to make sure that they had a cryptocurrency account set up so that they could pay the ransom as quickly as possible in the event of a cyber attack.
But despite your warnings, they implemented this policy, didn't they?
Yes, they did.
And you were concerned about this because you knew if they had this policy and the system was hacked, this could lead to chaos in the hospital, correct?
Well, hospitals are usually chaotic in general, so I wouldn't say that. Sure, there's always chaos in the hospital.
But is it your statement in court today that you didn't say if they implemented the policy and there was a hack, this hospital could be put in chaos, correct?
No, I did say that.
So I'd like to talk about the email chain that's sitting up there. Is it still up there?
No, ma'am, I don't think so.
I have a copy if you need. Your Honor, permission to approach a witness with what has been previously admitted as Exhibit 7.
You may.
Read along silently as I read aloud. God knows what would happen to the patients here. Did I read that correctly?
I didn't see where you're reading from. Yes, that's what it says.
This was your statement that you made to the Board of Directors?
Yes, that's what I emailed Dr. Virginia Fox.
Your Honor, we pass the witness.
Redirect.
Briefly, Your Honor. Mr. Jackson, do you currently have that $150,000?
No, I don't. I don't have it anymore. It was taken from me.
And what was the worst thing that you thought would happen to the patients?
Patient records being made public. Never this, not death.
No further questions, Your Honor. I pass the witness.
Recross.
Very brief recross, Your Honor. Even though the money was taken from you, you planned to obtain $150,000 in this hack, correct?
Yes.
Pass the witness, Your Honor.
May this witness step down?
Yes, you may. Call your next witness.
Your Honor, at this time, the defense calls Nurse Alex Karev to the stand. Before I begin, Your Honor, may I retrieve Exhibit 1?
Yes, you may.
Also, may I inquire as to how much time the defense has remaining?
Yes, you may.
Would you please introduce yourself to the ladies and gentlemen of the jury?
Hello, my name is Alex Karev.
What do you do for a living, Miss Karev?
Well, I currently work as a nurse at the Gannister Flint Memorial Hospital, but I previously worked at the TGH, or Texoma General Hospital.
And what did you do at that hospital in which you formerly worked, TGH?
I worked as a nurse in the A&E department. It means accident and emergency. It was my job to take in patients and record their information.
And did you have any other duties with the hospital?
Yes, I also continued to care for and treat my patients.
Nurse Karev, if we could get to the reason why you're here today, were you ever tasked with caring for a patient named Mulder Scully?
Yes, I was.
Could you tell us about him?
Yes. Mr. Scully came into the hospital on April 1st, just a few days after our new paperless system went live. He was 75 years old, and when I first saw him, he had a deep laceration on his left hand, and it was very swollen.
And do you know how he got that laceration?
I learned during the intake process that while trimming hedges, Mr. Scully had fallen off of his ladder and onto the blade of his hedge trimmer. giving him the cut.
And other than that cut on his hand, was there anything else wrong with Mulder Scully?
Well, during intake, I took Mr. Scully's vitals, like his blood pressure, heart rate, and body temperature. And I noted that he had a slightly elevated fever. But aside from that, everything was normal.
Nurse Krev, what did you do after you checked Mulder Scully's vitals?
I asked Mr. Scully if he had any allergies. That's what I do with all my patients. And he informed me that he was allergic to penicillin, which is an antibiotic primarily used against bacterial infections.
What did you do next, Nurse Krev?
Well, I was about to move on with the intake process, but Mr. Scully's daughter, Dana, who was with him at the time, reminded her father that he also had an allergy to naproxen.
And could you explain what naproxen is?
Well, naproxen is an NSAID, or a non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drug, but it's used to treat pain and inflammation.
And did Mulder Scully mention this allergy to naproxen when you initially asked him about his allergies?
No, he forgot to mention his second allergy, but that's not really uncommon for someone that was his age.
Did you make a note at that time that Mulder Scully forgot to mention things?
Objection, Your Honor. Speculation. The opposing counsel asked if he forgot to remember things. They've only shown one instance of the witness forgetting one thing, one allergy on one occasion.
Response.
Your Honor, if that's opposing counsel's only objection, I can reword the question.
Rephrase your question.
And did you make a note at that time that Mulder Scully had forgotten to mention that allergy?
No, I did not.
Nurse Karev, did Dana Scully do anything else while you were talking to her dad?
Yes. While we were still in Mr. Scully's room, Dana wrote her phone number on the whiteboard in his room in case we needed to call at any later point in time.
And did you ever call Dana Scully at any point up until her father's death?
No, but we really should have called her.
Nurse Karev, after you finished talking with Dana Scully, what did you do?
I placed a red allergy wristband on Mr. Scully, notifying any and all hospital staff that he had allergies we needed to keep aware of.
Your Honor, may I approach the witness?
You may.
Is this that allergy wristband you were talking about?
Yes, it is.
Now, looking at this wristband, did you write his specific allergies, penicillin and naproxen, on this wristband?
No, I did not.
Nurse Karev, did you write those allergies anywhere, like on the whiteboard?
No, I did not.
Nurse Karev, was anyone else with you during this intake process?
Yes, Dr. Robbins was with me, and after I finished conducting intake, he prescribed 10 milligrams of hydrocodone, which is a painkiller, and a CT scan to check the extent of Mr. Scully's injuries.
And what did you and Dr. Robbins do after the CT scan?
Well, we determined that Mr. Scully should stay overnight for observation. So at about 5 o'clock that afternoon, I moved Mr. Scully to a room on the 10th floor. And after staying with him for a little bit, I left and went home.
And did you see Mr. Scully again?
Yes, the next morning when I came back into work, and his daughter Dana was with him again.
And at that time, had the cut on his hand healed?
The cut hadn't healed, but the swelling on his hand had gotten a little better. So I left and checked back in later that day at about 4 in the afternoon.
And how did he look then?
The swelling had gotten a little worse, so I paged Dr. Robbins for re-examination.
And what did Dr. Robbins do?
After re-examining Mr. Scully, Dr. Robbins prescribed penicillin and bocatroxyphen for the pain and swelling.
Could you explain what bocatroxyphen is?
Bocatroxyphen is a medication used to treat pain and inflammation, but most importantly, it's a derivative of naproxen, which was one of Mr. Scully's allergies.
Now, Nurse Karev, did Dr. Robbins administer those two medications right then and there?
No. I made sure to remind Dr. Robbins that Mr. Scully had an allergy band on, and that we needed to double check his allergies.
And how did Dr. Robbins respond?
Well, Dr. Robbins groaned and then hurriedly asked Mr. Scully what he was allergic to, and we were informed that he was allergic to penicillin. So Dr. Robbins changed the penicillin in his prescription to Yarbothromax.
Did Mulder Scully also mention that he was allergic to naproxen?
No, he once again forgot to mention that second allergy.
Did you remember that important second allergy, Nurse Karev?
No, unfortunately I did not.
How about Dr. Robbins? Did Dr. Robbins remember naproxen?
No, we both completely forgot about that second allergy.
Nurse Karev, did you call Dana Scully's phone number on the whiteboard to confirm allergies before administering medication?
No, we didn't call her, but like I said earlier, we really should have.
Nurse Karev, was it an emergency situation at that time in which you needed to give your patient a new medication?
The swelling on Mr. Scully's hand had gotten a little bit worse, but aside from that, his condition was not life-threatening.
So Nurse Karev, after you did give this medication, what happened?
I left Mr. Scully for about 45 minutes and then went back to check on him, and that's when I noticed that something was seriously wrong.
What was wrong, Nurse Karev?
Well, Mr. Scully was having trouble breathing and was suffering from hypotension, which is abnormally low blood pressure.
And do you know why he was experiencing these symptoms?
At that time, I assumed that it was because of the medication that we had given Mr. Scully, and I later learned that I was right.
So what did you do after seeing your patient experiencing these symptoms?
Well, I immediately paged Dr. Robbins, and he raced right down.
And based on what you saw Dr. Robbins do, was he able to recognize what was wrong with Mr. Scully?
Not really, and instead of trying to figure out what was wrong with Mr. Scully, Dr. Robbins and I just got into an argument about patient treatment.
And what happened after you got into this argument?
Well, we realized that Mr. Scully was having an allergic reaction to one of the medications that we'd given him, the bocatroxyphen.
With that new knowledge of bocatroxyphen, then was Dr. Robbins able to treat his patient?
Honestly, I don't know if Dr. Robbins would have been able to treat his patient, because right after finding out that Mr. Scully was going into anaphylaxis, Dr. Robbins ran away.
Wait, Dr. Robbins ran away while his patient was dying? Why?
I have no idea, but nevertheless, Dr. Robbins abandoned myself and his patient while he was going into anaphylactic shock.
So what did you do, Nurse Karev, being left alone with the dying patient?
Well, I immediately called the code blue and administered epinephrine, hoping that it would cure the anaphylaxis.
And did it cure the anaphylaxis?
No, the epinephrine didn't do anything, and Mr. Scully flatlined.
And what did you do after Mulder Scully flatlined, Nurse Karev?
I did everything I could to save his life. I performed an emergency tracheotomy to try to reestablish an airway, and performed CPR to try to restart his heart. But nothing worked, and Mr. Scully passed away.
Thank you, Nurse Karev. Your Honor, I have no further questions at this time. I pass the witness.
Cross-examination.
Now, after Mulder Scully's death, you were fired, right?
Yes, I was.
Objection, Your Honor. This is irrelevant what happened after Mulder Scully's death. I object to relevance under 401.
Response.
Your Honor, opposing counsel has used this witness testimony to show fault in hospital treatment and is blaming the PMT's, or the Mulder Scully's death as the fault of this witness and the doctor. And understanding why this witness was fired and if it had to do with actuality to Mulder Scully's death or not would be relevant.
Overrule.
Yes, Your Honor.
After Mulder Scully's death, you were fired.
Yes, that's correct.
Do you believe that you were wrongfully fired?
I do believe that, yes. I believe that it should have been Dr. Robbins who should have been fired.
Well, you believe you were used as a scapegoat.
Yes, I did everything that I could. I did everything correctly in trying to save him.
Well, Nurse Karev, you blame the PMT system as one of the reasons that Mulder Scully tragically died.
One of the reasons, but the
Let
second...
me redirect you to my question. Is that a yes or a no? You blame the PMT system as one of the reasons that Mulder Scully died.
Yes, as one of the reasons.
So, as we heard, you're a nurse for Mulder Scully.
Yes, I was.
And earlier you recognized the allergy wristband, right?
Yes, that was me that reminded Dr. Robbins of the wristband.
You're under permission to approach with what was previously admitted.
You may.
Now, this is the allergy wristband that was put on the patient.
Yes, it was.
And as you said on direct examination, nowhere does it list his allergies.
No, it does not.
So the allergies weren't listed on the allergy wristband, right?
That's correct.
But they were listed on the PMT system.
Yes.
And you would recognize the PMT system, the Mulder Scully's medical record, if I were to show it to you.
Yes, I would.
You're under permission to approach with what was already been admitted as Exhibit 3.
You may.
Now take a moment to look this over if you need, but as you're familiar with it, can you tell us what I've just handed you?
This is an image of Mr. Scully's patient chart.
And this patient chart was available exclusively on the PMT system.
Yes, it was.
Now can you hold that up and show it to the jury? And can you show us where Mulder Scully's description of his injuries was?
The description of his injuries was right in this area.
Can you show us where Mulder Scully's pain level during intake was?
Once again, it was right in this area on the chart.
Can you show us where the medications were prescribed during his treatment, where that information is located?
Right here.
And can you show us where Mulder Scully's allergies are located?
Right here.
Now, this was taken away, wasn't it?
I'm sorry, could you repeat the question?
Sure. The PMT system was shut down, right?
Yes, it was.
And as a result of this hack, all of these records were taken away.
Yes, we did not have access to the records.
Mulder Scully's records were taken away.
Yes.
And, well, like as you said, all of the hospital's records.
Yes.
So you didn't have access to one single amount of information from that record.
Once again, yes.
Now, did you hear Lane Parrish testify earlier?
I did.
So you heard him testify that one of the uses of the PMT system is to input symptoms for a suggested diagnosis.
Yes, I did.
So the PMT system went down.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yes.
you could no longer input symptoms for a suggested diagnosis.
That's true, but
Well,
the doctor...
is that a yes?
Yes, but that's not necessarily entirely true for the suggested diagnosis.
Okay, well, correct me if I'm wrong. The PMT system was shut down, and this benefit from the PMT system was shut down along with it.
Yes, but it's also the doctor's job to
Well,
diagnose
that's not
a
my
patient.
question. This was shut down, wasn't it?
Yes, that's true.
Along with the suggested medications that Lane Parrish testified about.
Yes, that's also true.
So the system was shut down, and all of these resources were taken away.
Yes.
Thank you, Your Honor. I pass this witness.
Redirect.
Yes, Your Honor, briefly. Nurse Krev, opposing counsel talked a lot about the necessity of the PMT, but is it possible for doctors to treat their patients simply by viewing the patient's symptoms?
Absolutely, that's their job. The PMT was live for not even 2 weeks before they went down. It was still the doctor's job to diagnose, treat, and administer medication to their patients.
And Nurse Krev, did those records come back online before Mulder Scully died?
Yes, they came back on.
And when they did come back on, did Dr. Robbins or you ever use that suggested treatment part of the system that opposing counsel talked about?
No, we didn't.
No further questions, Your Honor. I pass the witness.
Recross, Your Honor.
Yes.
So during Mulder Scully's treatment, you saw the patient's wristband, right?
Yes, I did.
And after seeing this wristband,
Objection, Your Honor. No wristband was talked about during redirect examination. I would object that it's outside the scope.
Your Honor, may I respond?
You may.
Opposing counsel discussed the prescription of bocotraxfen. In this line of questioning, I will show the connection between the prescription and the use of the PMT system that opposing counsel said was not vital.
If I may respond, Your Honor, I talked of no such administration of bocotraxfen during my redirect examination. I would again renew my objection outside the scope.
Your objection is overruled.
Yes, Your Honor.
So after seeing the witness's or the patient's wristband, you went to check for allergies, right?
Yes, we did, and we also asked the patient his allergies.
So after you saw the wristband, you asked the patient for his allergies because you needed to know before prescribing the medication.
Yes.
So if the PMT system had been up, you would have seen the wristband and gone to check for his allergies on the PMT system.
Yes, but that's not the only method we had of checking
Well, that's
allergies.
not my question. You would have gone to the PMT system to check for his allergies.
Yes.
And if the PMT system would have been up, as you testified, you would have seen his allergies.
Yes, that's correct.
But the PMT system was shut down by Avery Jackson's hack, right?
Yes.
So you couldn't access these resources.
We couldn't access the records, but we had access to his allergies.
Thank you, Your Honor. You pass this witness.
The witness may step down. Call your next witness.
Yes, Your Honor. At this time, the defense calls Addison Montgomery to the stand. Before I begin, Your Honor, may I inquire how much time defense has remaining?
Yes, you may.
Oh, that would be just under 10 minutes.
Your Honor, may I also retrieve Exhibit 3 from the jury?
Yes, you may.
May I proceed?
Yes, you may.
Good evening. Please introduce yourself to the jury.
Good evening. My name is Addison Montgomery. I'm 38 years old and I'm a practicing medical doctor.
And where did you receive your education?
Well, after a hard decision between many schools, I ultimately decided to attend Southern Texoma University, or STU. I graduated with degrees in biology, biochemistry, and a minor in philosophy.
And what did you do after you graduated from STU?
Well, I was recruited by some of the top medical schools in the world, and I decided to attend the amazing Karolinska Institute in Stockholm, Sweden. I received a fellowship in medical research, and then I graduated in 2004 and returned to Texoma for my residency.
And where did you complete this residency?
At Leonard McCoy General Hospital, and then I worked briefly at Northern Texoma Doctors Hospital, where I studied immunology, diseases, allergies, drug interactions, and treatments to various ailments.
Dr. Montgomery, what are you doing now?
I now work at St. Nicholas Texoma Hospital, where I'm the youngest lead medical researcher in the state. I've also opened my own practice in the legal field to offer my opinion on various medical issues.
What medical issues do you research?
As a high-level medical researcher, my expertise is in immunology, drug interactions, allergies, and how to treat them.
So, why are you here today?
Well, I was hired to look at everything involved in this case and render my opinion as to Mr. Scully's cause of death.
What information did you rely on in your investigation?
I relied on all of Mr. Scully's medical information, all given exhibits, and statements from both the prosecution and the defense.
Would an expert in your field normally rely on these types of things to form conclusions?
They would.
And was this sufficient facts and data to form a conclusion?
Yes.
And will your conclusions aid the jury in understanding the facts of today's case?
Absolutely.
So, Dr. Montgomery, what was your conclusion of today's case?
Well, after looking at everything, I came to the conclusion that the ultimate cause of Mr. Scully's death was not an inability to access records, but rather the hospital's malpractice in reference to treating Mr. Scully's allergic reaction.
Where did you begin this investigation?
I began on April 1st, the day Mr. Scully was admitted to the hospital, and I reviewed Nurse Karev's intake report.
And what did you learn from this intake report?
Well, I learned that the hospital was made aware of Mr. Scully's allergy to penicillin, but more importantly, I learned that they were made aware of Mr. Scully's deadly allergy to naproxen, which later caused complications.
Why would this allergy cause complications?
Well, Dr. Robbins prescribed bocatraxfen, which is the ultimate cause of Mr. Scully's allergic reaction.
Can you explain to the jury a little bit about bocatroxyfen?
Of course. Bocatraxfen, or Boco, was created in 2013, and it's a heavy derivative of naproxen. And naproxen is an NSAID, or a non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drug.
So why was prescribing this Boco a complication?
Prescribing Boco was a risky move because, one, Mr. Scully was allergic to naproxen, which is in Boco, and two, the surprisingly short testing period of the drug revealed some negative effects.
What were these negative effects?
Well, the most severe was referred to as NERD. And although it wasn't that common, it had a very high morbidity rate. Every doctor should be aware of this risk after prescribing Boco.
What exactly is NERD?
NERD, or NSAID exacerbated respiratory disease, is an allergy to NSAIDs causing a patient to go into anaphylaxis with skin rashes, asthma-like symptoms, and hypotension.
Well, Dr. Montgomery, did NERD have a bearing in your investigation?
Oh, absolutely. After reviewing everything, it was painfully clear to me that Mr. Scully was suffering from a textbook case of NERD.
And how do you treat a case of NERD?
NERD is very treatable. It's treated just like any other allergic reaction, except for that it doesn't respond to epinephrine. But epinephrine isn't the only step in treating an allergic reaction. Next, you need to establish an airway or administer an inhaler or any other drug aiding asthma-like symptoms.
And did the hospital treat it properly?
No. Dr. Robbins failed to realize that Mr. Scully was suffering from NERD or any allergic reaction.
So what did the hospital do to treat Mr. Scully?
Well, Dr. Robbins abandoned Mr. Scully in the middle of an allergic reaction and left Nurse Karev to deal with the issue without any prior knowledge of NERD.
And how did Nurse Karev handle the situation?
I commend Nurse Karev for everything she tried to do. However, she just wasn't equipped to handle this situation, and it was saddening to see that she was used as a scapegoat for the hospital's mistakes.
Dr. Montgomery, are you aware that the records were down?
Yes, however, they came up shortly after Mr. Scully's allergic reaction began and were available to all medical staff, including Dr. Robbins, at the time of Mr. Scully's allergic reaction.
Your Honor, may I approach the witness who has been previously entered as Exhibit 3?
You may.
Dr. Montgomery, do you know what this is?
Yes, it is Mr. Scully's medical records.
And do you see the differential diagnosis button on the bottom?
I do.
During your investigation at any time, did you notice that someone pressed that button once they had the records back?
No, I never heard of them using it at all. I don't know why a doctor would need to.
And did they have these records back before Mr. Scully died?
Yes, and they made no difference at all. Even after accessing the records, seeing naproxen as an allergy, and remembering that allergy, Dr. Robbins still failed to acknowledge that Mr. Scully was suffering from an allergic reaction that could be deadly if not treated properly.
Thank you, Dr. Montgomery. Your Honor, I have no further questions at this time. I pass the witness.
Cross-examination?
Yes, Your Honor, may I proceed?
Yes.
Dr. Montgomery, when you investigate various medical issues, you use documents to review your cases.
Absolutely.
And you use evidence to come to your conclusions.
I do.
In all the cases that you look through.
Absolutely.
Now, Dr. Montgomery, were you here for the testimony of Lane Parrish?
I was.
So you heard Lane Parrish testify that one of the goals of the PMT system was to speed up the intake process for patients.
Yes,
And the hospital used the PMT system in order to do so, correct?
they did.
But the PMT system was shut down as a result of Avery Jackson's hacking, correct?
Yes, they weren't able to access the medical records.
Because of Avery Jackson's hacking.
Yes.
Now, due to the system being shut down, they were unable to achieve this goal of speeding up the intake process, correct?
I suppose that would slow it down a bit.
Now, another goal of the PMT system was to improve nurse-doctor communications, correct?
Yes.
And the hospital used the PMT system for this communication process, correct?
Do you mean like paging nurses and doctors?
Yes, in order to speed up the communication
Yes.
between nurses and doctors and recording their information.
Yes, that is what they used it for.
And the hospital relied on the system for this?
That and pagers, and doctors communicate in a lot of different ways, but yes, the PMT was one way.
Now, because the PMT system was shut down as a result of Avery Jackson's hacking, they were unable to achieve this goal of improving nurse-doctor communications, correct?
That's incorrect.
But they were unable to achieve the goal that the PMT system required, correct?
No, you see, Avery Jackson only locked the medical records part.
Dr.
It had nothing
Montgomery?
to do with the communication between nurses and doctors.
Let me redirect you to my question. The PMT system's goal was to improve nurse-doctor communications by putting information in one spot, correct?
Yes, I suppose.
And that was unable to be achieved because Avery Jackson hacked the system.
I guess because they aren't able to access the records.
Now, another goal of the PMT system was to reduce medical mistakes, correct?
I suppose.
And the hospital used the PMT system to reduce medical mistakes.
What exactly are you referring to? I don't understand.
Lane Parrish's testimony when he testified that one of the goals of the PMT system is to reduce medical mistakes, correct?
In what way?
In any way, by inputting symptoms.
Yes, I suppose that was a goal of the PMT.
And because the PMT system was shut down as a result of Avery Jackson's hacking, they were unable to achieve this goal, correct?
Yes, they were unable to check their diagnosis.
Now, were you here for the testimony of Dr. Arizona Robbins?
I was.
And you heard Dr. Robbins testify that one of the goals of the PMT system was to input information into the PMT, such as allergies.
Yes, the intake process.
And the hospital used the PMT to record this information.
They did.
But because the system was shut down, they were unable to access this information, correct?
Yes.
Now, another goal of the PMT system was to speed up diagnosis.
Are you referring again to accessing the records or the differential
Specifically
diagnosis?
regarding speeding up diagnosis, correct?
And putting the symptoms in?
Yes.
Yes, I guess, again, that was a goal of the PMT.
And because the PMT system was shut down, they were unable to speed up diagnosis.
Yes.
Now, Dr. Montgomery, you're familiar with the drug vocotraxafen, correct?
Yes, very much.
And you agree that the benefits of vocotraxafen heavily outweigh the risks?
In some cases, it is viewed that way by many doctors. So
in some
yes.
cases. So in the cases where hospital staff has access to the risks, the benefits may outweigh the risks, correct?
No.
So when do the benefits outweigh the risks?
The benefits outweigh the risk when a doctor is able to treat an allergic reaction. In this case, Dr. Robbins was clearly unable to recognize and treat an allergic reaction, so it was shouldn't have been prescribed.
Objection, Your Honor. Out of mode and order, I ask that opposing counsel let my witness finish her answer before interrupting her.
Response, Your Honor.
You may respond.
The witness was going into testifying about something that my question was not specific to. Therefore, I was going to redirect her to my question.
Your Honor, may I respond?
Overrule.
Dr. Montgomery, redirecting you to my question, the PMT system held patient allergies, correct?
Yes, it did.
And in Mulder Scully's case, the risk to bocotraxophin was his allergy to naproxen, correct?
Yes, but they would have still prescribed it, or Dr. Robbins would have still probably prescribed it even with access to these records.
Because they would have known about the allergy to naproxen.
I'm sorry?
Dr. Robbins would have prescribed bocotraxophin because she would have known about the allergy to naproxen as it was on the PMT system, correct?
Doctors should be aware of adverse risks no matter what the patient tells them their allergies are.
But
They don't
Dr.
always know
Montgomery-
what all their allergies are.
Just to clarify for the court, in this case, his allergy was to naproxen.
Yes, it was.
Now, if the system had been up, they would have had access to his medical records.
Yes, they would have.
And if the system had been up, they would have known about his allergy to naproxen.
They would have.
If the system had been up, they would have known that his allergy to naproxen played a risk in his treatment, correct?
They should have known that regardless.
Your Honor, I've passed the witness.
Redirect.
No redirect necessary, Your Honor.
All right.
May this witness step down?
Yes, she may. Does the defense rest?
Yes, Your Honor. The defense rests.
Both sides close?
Yes, Your Honor.
All right. Take a minute before closing argument.
The prosecution is ready to proceed, Your Honor.
Okay,
Your Honor, may I have a moment to gather exhibits?
you may.
Your Honor, at this time, I'd like to reserve 1 minute for rebuttal.
You may.
Your Honor, the defense is ready to proceed with closing arguments.
May I proceed, Your Honor?
You may.
May it please the court, opposing counsel, members of the jury. God knows what could happen to the patients here. On April 1st of 2017, Avery Jackson played God. Formerly working at Texoma General Hospital, Jackson worked with the paperless medical technology, or the PMT. By working with the system, he knew about the benefits, but he also knew about the flaws. Jackson chose to exploit these flaws and caused the death of a 75-year-old man who went into the hospital with a simple cut on his left hand. God knows what could happen to the patients here. When the PMT system was implemented, the benefits were extraordinary. It improved nurse-doctor communications, quickened treatments and diagnosis, and improved quality of care at Texoma General Hospital. It held patient records, files, information, and labs. Information that's crucial to patient care. Mulder Scully died after the hospital staff could not access the system that Avery Jackson violated. Why? To receive $150,000. To Jackson, receiving from the hospital what he claims to be petty cash was worth the life of a man who went into the hospital with a simple cut, only needing simple stitches. Today we brought before you 3 witnesses to detail the case. Dana Scully testified about her father's experience and the chaos that ensued at the hospital. Because when Jackson played God, he put the hospital staff into a frenzy. Dana went into the hospital with her father after a minor accident with hedge trimmers, but she came out grieving with her crying children. Dr. Robbins testified that when the records were down, they were unable to access patient information, including allergies. Information that is vital to care. Finally, Lane Parrish told you that Avery Jackson had warned him about the risks to the PMT system. Jackson worked with the system and he knew how to hack it. But most importantly, he knew about the risks to the patients when he said, God only knows what could happen to the patients here. Today, the defense tried to tell you their story. They want you to believe that the hospital is at fault, or that Dr. Robbins did an improper job. However, records are vital to care, and their resources were cut off when Jackson hacked the hospital. Avery Jackson played God when he took patient lives into his own hands. He played God when he stole the records from the hospital. Avery Jackson has already admitted to hacking the system, but now he's attempting to avoid the consequences. He knew of the risks, having warned Lane Parrish months prior, but he took those risks into his own hands, using his thirst for revenge to punish the hospital, to punish Dana Scully, to punish Mulder Scully, to put the entire PMT system on hold until his ransom had been satisfied. God only knows what could happen to the patients here. Today we have proven beyond a reasonable doubt that Avery Jackson caused the death of Mulder Scully. At the end of today's trial, we ask you to find a verdict of justice. Avery Jackson caused chaos to ensue at the hospital, and he caused the death of a 75-year-old man with one simple cut. For the past 2 years, Dana has been dragged through trials, having to relive the worst day of her life. But Jackson didn't just steal records. He stole futures. Because of Avery Jackson's actions, the bench in Mulder Scully's garden sits empty. He will never be able to pick flowers with his grandchildren. Jackson stole those precious moments just to prove that patients could be harmed. And he was right. How much is a life worth? To Avery Jackson, it was worth $150,000. Find Avery Jackson guilty. Thank you.
May I proceed?
You may.
May it please the court. Your Honor, opposing counsel, members of the jury. Today you've heard about Avery Jackson, a hacker, not a killer. As my co-counsel, Charlie Stock, told you at the beginning of today's trial, the burden of proof lies solely with the prosecution. They have to prove to you, beyond a reasonable doubt, that my client committed the offense of manslaughter. And in order to do that, they have to prove to you two things. One, Mr. Jackson consciously disregarded a substantial risk, therefore he acted recklessly. And two, that Mr. Scully's death would not have occurred but for the actions of Mr. Jackson. But members of the jury, they have failed. Today you heard that Mr. Jackson took a job at TGH, where he was given the responsibility to find the vulnerabilities in the new PMT system. And he did that. You heard from Mr. Parrish and Mr. Jackson that he tried over and over to warn of these vulnerabilities that he found. But members of the jury, over and over, he was ignored. Over and over, Mr. Parrish told him, no patients are going to be in danger. There's an exception to our no pay policy. The board may choose to override this policy if there's complete denial of patient records. But it was the hospital board that chose not to follow through on this policy. You heard from the chairman of the board herself. She didn't care what the virus had done. She was not going to pay that ransom under any circumstance. Members of the jury, they also have to prove to you that the death would not have occurred but for the actions of Mr. Jackson. But once again, they have failed. Dana Scully, she told you that she told the nurse and the medical staff about his deadly allergy to naproxen, but the hospital forgot. You heard that Dr. Robbins was likely to prescribe bocatroxyfen anyway, even if he knew about this deadly allergy to naproxen. Dana Scully wrote her number on the whiteboard, told the hospital, call if you have any questions or concerns. Never received a phone call. Dr. Robbins administered bocatroxyfen, and she shifted the blame to Nurse Karev, but she ordered it to be administered. The hospital relied so heavily on this PMT that it enabled their laziness. Dr. Robbins said himself today that without this PMT, he was not prepared. He forgot how to be a doctor. Members of the jury, Addison Montgomery came before you, an expert in allergic reactions, and told you that Mr. Scully was having all the signs of an allergic reaction: hypertension, skin rashes, and asthma-like symptoms. But Dr. Robbins, failed to recognize any of these symptoms. And Dr. Robbins claims that if he had this system, he would have been able to treat Mr. Scully. But the truth is, members of the jury, this system was up before Mr. Scully died, and Dr. Robbins still failed to recognize the symptoms and treat them properly, even with the information right in front of him. They shifted the blame to Nurse Karev's medication. Nurse Karev was fired, and they found another scapegoat. They've shifted the blame to Mr. Jackson. Members of the jury, if the hospital had paid the ransom up front, if they'd called Dana Scully, if they had recognized the symptoms, if any action by the hospital had been done differently, if they had done the simple fix, Mr. Scully would be alive today. Members of the jury, when you go back to the jury room to deliberate, remember what is on trial today. Not the fact if Mr. Jackson hacked the system, but if that hack caused the death of Mr. Scully. The hospital was blamed once before because their actions were sufficient. The internal investigation found Nurse Karev guilty. Lane Parrish said some of the blame is on Nurse Karev, and Dana Scully blames the hospital and said that those mistakes are not erased. Members of the jury, Mr. Jackson's a hacker. He's not a killer. There's only one reasonable option. Mr. Jackson is not guilty of the manslaughter of Mulder Scully. Thank you.
Rebuttal, Your Honor?
Yes, you
Before
may.
before I proceed, may I inquire as to how much time is remaining?
Yes, you may.
55 seconds.
Thank you. May it please the court, opposing counsel, members of the jury. Competence. At the beginning of today's trial, Mr. Stock got up here and attempted to tell you that the hospital is incompetent. But what actually happened? Avery Jackson shut down the paperless medical technology system. He had an intent, he had knowledge, and he had motive. He had knowledge of the risk to the patients, and he had the intent to pocket $150,000. Even if his intentions were good, when you go back to the jury room, they're going to hand you a piece of paper. And that piece of paper isn't going to say, what were Avery Jackson's intentions? The piece of paper is going to say, did Avery Jackson's hack cause the death of Mulder Scully? And the answer is yes. Avery Jackson stole the hospital resources. Find Avery Jackson guilty. Thank you.
All right, members of the jury, you are retired to deliberate your verdict.
Prosecution.
Anywhere.
No, but she's, I think, going to be on it.
Okay.
Yeah. We'll let-
Just sitting here for you. I have no idea what to do right there.
Please be seated.
This has been a great competition. The way that we do this part now is we're going to celebrate our third place teams before we celebrate our first and second place teams. We always go backwards. So we're going to start with our third place team. I invited both to be here. Do we have someone here from Regent School of Boston? Please come up and get your trophy. Ladies and gentlemen, it's their contribution. Let Melissa get a picture of you.
Yes, please.
Cindy, you were wondering you would be your first trophy. It's awesome.
Great, thank you so much.
The other third place team is Lubbock High School.
More on this side, please.
Put your feet closer to the floor.
I love that joke.
It's funny to watch people do. Right.
All right. Thank you.
Good, thank you guys. And now, before we proceed, we're going to let the judging panel introduce themselves. Justice Myers?
Well, good evening. It's always a pleasure to judge, especially the final round of the Texas High School Mock Trial Competition. My name is Lana Myers. I'm a justice on the 5th District Court of Appeals. And before that, I was a criminal district court judge in Dallas County for about 15 years and have been on the Court of Appeals since 2009 and have served as a former chair and co-chair of the Mock Trial Committee and judged mock trial for many, many years, beginning in the 80s. So I've done it for a long time, and I am never disappointed. You all are amazing, and I just applaud you for all the preparation, time, everything that you put into this, because it shows in your performance today. Would you all please join me in giving these students a round of applause? And our very important jury members, if you all will please introduce yourselves, starting on the first row.
My name is Jim Young. I'm a lawyer, arbitrator, mediator, and professor here in the Dallas area. And more to the point, I'm the assistant coach for the mock trial mediation teams at the University of Texas at Dallas. I've been doing this for a long time, and I continue to be thrilled every year by what you all do. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Erin Nowell. I'm a justice on the 5th District Court of Appeals. Great job. So impressed. Thank y'all for doing this for us.
Hi, I'm Jamie Olin. I work for a nonprofit doing litigation, and I do a lot of mock trial judging every year, and these teams were just amazing this year. Congratulations.
Taylor Rex Robertson. I'm a vice chair, chief case writer, and I'm a commercial litigator at Haynes & Boone here in Dallas.
Hi, I'm Laura Benitez Geisler. I'm the president of the Dallas Bar Association. I'm also a trial lawyer at the firm Zimmerman, McCafferty, Casada, and Geisler. And wow, you guys were amazing. Well done.
My name's Robert Tobey. I'm with the law firm of Johnston Tobey Baruch. I'm a trial lawyer there. I am president-elect of the Dallas Bar, so I get to follow in Laura's big footsteps. But y'all were fantastic. Another great year and a terrific final round. Thank you very much.
Hi, good evening. My name is Alex Guillo. I'm a prosecutor here in Dallas County, the 265th. And I'm here on behalf of the Dallas Hispanic Bar Association. This was so amazing to watch, and it's just been an honor to be able to watch y'all.
Hi, my name is Sarah Rogers. I'm also a trial attorney here in Dallas. This year I have the honor of serving as the president of the Dallas Women Lawyers Association. So I'm very happy to see all of our female litigants, which is so wonderful, and our males as well. All of you all did such a fantastic job. Congratulations.
Good evening, my name is John Sholden. I work in the civil division of the Dallas DA's office. But the biggest reason I'm here is I was on the team that first won this 40 years ago.
I'm Galen G., a family law attorney and mediator here in Dallas.
I'm Tom Goranson. I also am a family lawyer in my own
only claim to interest in the state mock trial is I tried more cases this year than Jim did.
All right. I believe that the jury has reached its verdict. Will the defendant please rise? All right. Madam Foreperson, has the jury reached a verdict?
The jury has.
What is the jury's verdict?
The people find the defendant not guilty.
We will now celebrate our second place winner, One Day Academy. And now we will celebrate, if I could have everybody's attention, we will celebrate our first place winner, our 40th champion of 2019, Bishop Lynch High School.